Hello and welcome back. And that is right, today we want to look at this. This is the Xyber Hydra N150 powered 4-bay flash NAS solution, rocking out with two 2.5 gig ports there. It's got that quad-core Intel CPU, the Twin Lake, and alongside the 4 M.2 slots, there's also a 64 gig eMMC module inside. That ringing any bells? That remind you of anything? That's right. This device is largely identical to that of the GMK Tech G9 Nook box there, a NAS with something of a good news, bad news vibe to it there. Now, we're going to be coming back to that device later on because we've got to draw some comparisons, but this device is pretty much that. In fact, so much so that, and we'll get to this a little bit more later on, opening the device up, we found inside that the cooling fans located inside are also GMK Tech fans. So either this is being designed in exactly the same factory or it is schematic and design that another brand has purchased. Either way, this has improved in a few ways over that of that GMK Tech model we've already talked about there. But let's crack on with this a little bit more. Now, pricing on this isn't too bad. Rocking out at the moment at $218.99. That gets you the N150 CPU. It gets you 12 gig of memory. It gets you a 512 gig SSD in bay number 1. I'll say right now, as much as I like that this arrives with a 64 gig eMMC module inside that's got Ubuntu already pre-installed and good to go, you don't even have to install it. It's just one click, already password set up and you're in. I will say right now, I immediately flashed the hell over that and just stuck ZimaOS on top of that because of its lightweight, and we've got another video coming up on that soon. I recommend you do the same. It's really easy, it's completely free. You get a USB, you can set it up and have ZimaOS installed in something like this really, really easily. That's what I did, and for the rest of the video with the tests, that is what we were running on for this video. Also, that memory, can't upgrade it, and it is affixed to the PCB internally there. Not a big surprise, a lot of these N150 N355 CPU NAS devices arrive with the memory prefix, but at the very least, they've gone for a decent amount there. And of course, it is an ECC memory. You're never going to get ECC at that price point. Hell, a 16 gig module of ECC in sodium in DDR5 would probably cost somewhere on the way towards the whole cost of this to start with. So this is an economical box with an economical customer in mind. But there's going to be a lot of you watching this thinking, well look, I've seen plenty of videos about the G9 and its major issue, which is temperatures and heat. Why on earth am I going to consider basically the same thing in a different dress? Well, one main difference between them. When we landed them side by side, they're almost identical volumetrically with bare single millimeters of difference comparing the two of them, and the port configuration and layout largely identical. But the main difference is whereas the base of the GMK Tech, at least at the moment, is a plastic panel, the base on the Hydra is a metal plate. It is a full metal heat dissipation panel that's vented there as well. The fan placement is identical across them. The ventilation placement, although it's a little tight there for the CPU fan, it still has the two fans there on the base. It's largely identical. It's just the dissipation there, they've gone for that metal plate. Now, to GMK Tech's defense, they have said they were improving the cooling system when I reviewed this device, and maybe the newer generation of this has a metal panel there. But I'll tell you right now, that metal panel did make a difference. Unsurprisingly, ports and connections wise, it's all pretty darn familiar. You've got two types 2.5 GBE, a couple of HDMI outputs there alongside a USB that actually supports visual as well. The power supplier is delivered via USB as well, but it's an external power brick, so it is still technically a wall-mounted PSU there with USB-C on the end there, so it's not, you can't use any old-fashioned USB that you've got knocking around. On top of that, you've got three 10 gig USB Type A ports there on the rear. I know there are going to be users disappointed at the 2x2.5 gigabit Ethernet there. We are getting closer, I would say, to devices like this arriving with at least one 10 gig port there. We saw the likes of LinkStation do it with the N2. And I think right now it is just a question of heat, because a lot of those are Quantica, the AQC113 controller that's used for the 10 gig NIC in some cases. It's going to steal away some of those lanes. If this device was put down to 3x1 across those slots, maybe they could free up or at least share some of that architecture towards a 10 gig port. But at least right now, it's just not possible. Look at CWWK and some of their NAS motherboards right now that have got the Twin Lake CPUs with 10 gig. We reviewed one on the channel. I don't think it's going to be that long before we start seeing devices like this one from the Hydra rocking out with 10 gig eventually, but just we got to get the heat sorted, guys. And don't forget, M.2 to 10 GBE. If you're prepared to lose one of your slots, it's not the end of the road for 10G on something like this. Now let's talk about those M.2 NVMe's inside there. Now the OS drive isn't taking up any of the M.2s, it's actually underneath, just shy of the Wi-Fi 6 module inside. If you use Unraid, you can take advantage of that now, by the way. But each of these 4 M.2 slots here, they're all Gen 3 times 2 speed. Each one of them has 20 gigabyte or around 2 gigabyte potential bandwidth there. So how was performance? Well, with each, I went with drive-in bay number 1 and did a repeated read and a repeated write test in SSH. In read on that Gen 3 times 2 bay, it achieved 1.4 to 1.5 gigabytes per second on those repeated tests, and around 1.1 gigabytes per second on the repeated write test there. Now, that's obviously representative of a single bay, and you might be rating them together. So what I wanted to do then, because remember, we're still kind of bottlenecked by 2 times 2.5 GBE to really see maximum external bandwidth. Transferring data between SSD 1 and SSD 2, remember both of them are on Gen 3 times 2, still only achieved around 720 to 730 megabytes per second there. Not a huge surprise when you think of the up and down of 3 times 2 lanes there on that 9-lane CPU. So not terrible, but not breathtaking. For the price, I'm quite happy with it. And then when I went ahead and decided to hammer all 4 SSDs with repeated 1 gigabyte tests, not only to see any temperature throttling, but just to see how the CPU would handle it, every single SSD effectively went down to 900 megabytes to 1 gigabytes per second repeated writes across all of them. That was the CPU hitting 100% at that point. Overall, still good with those numbers for such a modest CPU NAS there to still achieve a gigabyte across all of the disks, and it did so. And when it did so on 100 tests, it didn't really throttle until it got to around the 80th or 90th test. So not too shabby there, to be honest. So let's talk temperatures, because this device, let's face it, that GMK Tech and its terrible temperatures at launch, that's going to be a concern for a number of you. So straight away, when we had the device set up, we left it for 24 hours, periodically accessing it every hour. Now, after that 24-hour period, the device sat at 52 to 54 degrees on the surrounding area of the device, and the base achieved 50 to 52 degrees there. So not fantastic after 24 hours with such small amounts of access, and it is a hot time of year here in the UK, but that was with the fans set to automatic, which is what it comes with out of the BIOS there from day one. Now, with repeated tests that I'll touch on later on, where we were hitting each of the SSDs with repeated 1 gigabyte write tests at the same time, with the CPU hitting 80 to 100%, the base panel got as high as 62 degrees across the SSDs. But although that was to be expected with such heavy writes, what concerned me was how long it took to dissipate that heat. It took ages. It took like 5 hours to get the device back to that 48 to 50 degrees mark there for the base panel, which isn't ideal with the fans on automatic. Ultimately, that means that if you've got heavy access priorities for this device, you're going to need to do what I did and head into the BIOS and start playing with the fans. In the BIOS there, I set the fans from automatic into manual and set them both to max. And we'll talk about noise later on. But with the fans set to maximum, obviously the temperature came down really quickly, but what about the general operational temperatures? Well, The surrounding environment of the device sat around 43 to 47 degrees, but the base panel was at a way more impressive 42 to 43 degrees. And again, that was after 24 hours. But then, of course, the fans were a little higher. So you have to factor that into a pinch increase in power consumption and, of course, noise. Could have been better, but trust me, it's been worse. So let's talk about noise. Well, with the device, when I had it set up, those 4 SSDs, and the SSDs were being periodically accessed over that 24-hour period without the fans on manual, just full automatic going up and down when they are needed, the audio level wasn't actually that bad. It was at around 30 to 32 dBA. For such a compact system and tiny fans, that's still pretty darn good. I wasn't able to get the system to automatically trigger the fans as high as possible though, even when I had the CPU up to 80 to 100%, which really surprised me. So I had to, again, go ahead, go into the backend on BIOS and ramp those fans up. Now when the fans are at maximum, the noise went up to 37 to 38 dBA, which is tolerable if you've got it in close proximity. And given you may not need such heavy access all the time, not too much of a problem. Let's hear both of those now. Next up, power consumption. Let's face it, the N150 CPU with the rest of the Twin Lake and Alder Lake processors, one of their biggest appeals isn't raw power, it's efficiency. So when I had the system in idle and the CPU sitting at around 4 to 6%, I'd done, and with all 4 of the SSDs just in idle, I didn't take them offline or remove them. This was the 4 SSDs waiting to be used, the OS loaded in, and the CPU at 4 to 6. The power consumption was around 15.6 to 15.7 watts. I'll say right now, although that CPU can get as low as 7 or 8 watts, with 4 SSDs there and the CPU not at 0, I'm happy with that, 15.6 to 15.7. Obviously, when I had the fans ramped up, when I had all 4 SSDs being accessed simultaneously with that repeated 1 gigabyte write to each of them and the CPU cranking at 100%, the power consumption was at 26 to 27 watts, which again may seem high, but factor in that's all 4 SSDs going guns blazing and the CPU at maximum utilization and the fans at maximum speed. You're not going to have the system in that usage environment 24/7, and those are really good numbers for such a compact flash NAS. That CPU, the N150, that's been around on a bunch of NAS devices for the first half of 2025, is good and balances very well between power consumption and output. But I will say that when we saw the product page for this device and we scrolled down into the official specs listed on that site, it did list other CPU options, one of which was that N355 CPU. Now at the moment, no one, not GMK Tech, not B-Link, not these guys, no one has rolled out the i3 8-core variation of this, almost certainly because of temperature reasons. And I don't think I would trust this chassis design with that much more heat generating processor realistically. I know it's the same architecture, but and even if you kept this at 3.2, that's a slightly beefier CPU than I think this arrangement and configuration is prepped for, at least at the moment. Bottom line, right now, if you're looking at buying a 4-bay flash solution and you are not in love with the at least first generation of this device and the heat that it's generating, and let's be honest, some of the negative feedback that's getting online, this is actually a pretty darn good alternative. And don't forget, that 218 arriving with that eMMC drive and a 512 SSD for your boot OS is quite nice stuff. That said, keep in mind, this isn't really a branded SSD. I'm going to do a little bit more digging into this included drive, but this isn't like a Samsung. It's not a Kingston or anything like that, the drive you get included, but it's still nice to have it. And again, I refer you to that Radal video that we saw when he modified the B-Link device there to add 10 GBE via an M.2 adapter to add 6 SATA there. Although this only has 4 M.2 lanes to play with, and therefore there's less scope for the scalability, I will say the fact that each one of those slots is Gen 3 times 2 does open the door to more bandwidth being shared by these devices, especially if you wanted to use SATA SSDs. Ultimately, I'm happy with this for the price. Is it a perfect NAS? No. Has this architecture been done better elsewhere? Yeah, there are better alternatives like this for this architecture in the market, but perhaps not at this price point. And that's really what we have to keep in mind when we look at this. At this price point, there's not much else on the market, really, other than the the Beelink ME Mini, and perhaps that GMK. There's not really much else. Maybe the TerraMaster F4 SSD. And I'm happy with this. I'm just interested to see where this brand is going to go for their next NAS solution, because this still feels like it's just this with a different coat on. But at least they've addressed that heat a little bit better. What do you guys think? Is this something that you're going to install in your home lab? Maybe a small compact Plex media server for 4K and maybe entry-level 8K? Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll probably do a follow-up video on this, just comparing it a little bit more to when this device gets upgraded. And certainly I'm interested in seeing just where devices like this are going to go when they start adding some rather more aggressive CPUs along the way. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. There'll be a written review coming up very soon, linked below. I recommend you check that out. If you're interested in getting a hold of one of these for yourself, there should be links in the description to get a hold of this and similar devices at a few different retailers. So if you found the video helpful, and if you're going to go to those stores anyway, please use those links in the description. I've also linked to the retail outlet where I got this from. Check that out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.